Are you coming back to school with me? We could have done it all so easily.
Hi, my name is Craig Thompson Wood. I'm your host on Teaching with Board Games, here today with Nathan Schreiber. So he's here today to graciously accepted to meet with me and share some of his time. So have this little interview and find out more about the company and the games. And so just let's take it away, Nathan.
All
Thank
right,
you
thanks
again
for
for
having me,
coming out.
Craig.
Just get a little bit about yourself. So board gaming, like
How did I end up
how long
there?
you been gaming? Yeah.
Okay, so like so I actually studied programming in college. So, software and games are pretty similar. Like you're making something with a finite set of conditions and it needs to run and complete itself. So that's basically like I mean, I loved playing games all my life as a kid. I'm trained as an illustrator primarily, though. Like I got out of college and I actually worked in the fashion industry, basically doing graphics and designs for kind of mass market stuff that got sold at Walmart. Little teenage girls T-shirts and things like that, drawing a lot of mermaids and cupcakes and hearts and things like that. But I always really liked doing comics. So comics were really what I was doing. And I started doing just my own comics. I've been doing my own comics for a really long time. And kind of started specializing in comics that explain things. I did a New York Times bestseller in 2010 called Healthcare Reform. It explained what's commonly referred to as Obamacare. And I wrote that with one of the architects of the original Massachusetts bill, an economist named Jonathan Gruber. And it was a lot of just sort of like explaining pretty dense stuff, like how complicated systems work. And as I started making more and more comics, I started thinking, like, wow, I really ought to make some more comics about science, because I really just love science. Science is something that just I think is fascinating, and a lot of people who agree with me there. And I just started making these comics for kids called these Science Ninjas comics, and they star actual little characters that are science ninjas. And they have these adventures, and they need to use science to sort of solve whatever obstacle they're in. And so I started making these comics, and it started sort of developing into a business. I'd go around to different schools and camps, and I would do experiments with kids, and I would project my comics on the wall. And I started thinking about like new activities I could do with the kids. And I was just like, like what if you just had Rummy, but instead of you're trying to build suits, you're trying to build molecules from elements in the periodic table. So I started working on that, and I connected with these two chemical engineers, Dr. Amanda Simpson and Dr. Naomi Klinghoffer, who, spoiler alert, she became my wife a little bit later. And we developed this game called Valence, and we picked a fixed number of elements, and you picked up a hand of cards, and it was just like, oh, okay, it's really, really simple. We had to play test the heck out of it, because I had some ideas about how the chemistry would work, and then Naomi or Amanda would be like, that's not really how that works, like, or you might not want to use these elements, you might want to use these types of molecules. We ended up making a pretty fun game that I think is pretty easy to pick up, and it's very interactive too. So it kind of covered, like I think I got really lucky, because I started making games after that, and it seemed like a lot harder. But making Valence originally, everything sort of fell into place like very quickly with putting it together. And I published the game myself, and we've sold about 25,000 copies of it so far. So it's been very successful, and a lot of people tell me that it's really helped their kids learn some pretty advanced chemistry. It's a game that if you know pretty basic arithmetic, you can learn how to play it. So if I'd say like a 7-year-old can do the type of arithmetic you're doing in Valence. You're basically just you're adding up to 0. So you're trying to find things that are +4 and -4 and match them together to make a molecule. What you're doing is you're matching different oxidation states of different elements to build molecules.
So now you say the game kind of came together easily. Do you think that's because it was just based on the science, and you had that sort of foundation? You just had to find how to gamify that?
Gamifying science can be tricky sometimes. I think it was a good concept, and I think that did make it easy. There was one big roadblock that we did have, and that was how do we get people to make because the way that Valence is set up is that you have a separate set of molecule cards, and you have element cards, and you build molecules. So you take a molecule when you build it out of the elements, and we needed to come up with some sort of way to code the like how are people going to know which molecule they're taking with these elements, and it's like if you already know chemistry, it's very easy, but if you don't, like how are you going to know that? And you're right, it's like when you look at the science, like like there's so many patterns in nature, and patterns are really just puzzles. And if you put enough puzzles together, you have a game. So, we organized sort of the colors of the elements by which column they're in the periodic table. So that way, it's very easy to identify, like, oh, this is the element and this element, they make that molecule. Or compound is a better way to put it. I use the term molecule as sort of like a broad term for I think the correct scientific term is like species. I just want to make sure that if there's any like chemistry nerds listening to like, well, that sounds like a compound. It's like, yeah, I know that, but like, like we're trying to make, there's not a really great word in chemistry for a stable collection of atoms. You can say it's a molecule, but that doesn't really include ions. You can call it a compound, but what's O2 then, So I just use the word molecule to refer to all those things, just for anybody who's really.
You're not getting any argument from me here. I'm one of those people that was learning a lot by playing the game, and
Great.
these games, they really impress me. Is like where you can play a game like this, like the Science Ninjas, and you're just learning so much by the play of it. Like, I mean, I know there's things much deeper than that, but at least giving a foundational understanding, and I understand by playing more, and just it certainly gives you that launching point. And I think that as a teacher, I could definitely see the benefits and the ways to use this in a classroom where you could play it and the kids could play it and understand it and appreciate it as a game. But then as you start to teach the lessons on top of it, suddenly there's that foundation that they would have there to suddenly say, okay, I get it now because this is like this, and this was happening in the game. And you can explain the concepts of what was happening in the game mechanics into a real life mechanics.
Absolutely. There's something that I think is really special about games and teaching. Um, something that I think is we don't really like to admit this as educators, and like I'd say in the very broad term, I'm an educator, but like we're always looking for kind of flashy ways to teach things, and maybe using games is, but in some ways using games is actually engaging one of the most sort of time-tested but tedious aspects of teaching, and that is rote learning. That just the idea of like repeating something a million times is actually a really great way to learn things. We don't like to say that because it just sounds boring even talking about it, and it usually is boring. But you think about all these things that you've learned through games, and it's really just through like the repetition. It's like I assume you've played Catan, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what's a brick and a wood? What does that make?
A road.
That makes a road. So everybody knows that, but there are so many patterns like that, or puzzles like that in nature. A carbon and two oxygen atoms make carbon dioxide. So you can just have somebody that's doing something like if you're doing it 100 times the way in a game, you're not really thinking about learning. You're thinking about trying to beat your opponent. You're thinking about trying to get the most points. So you're doing this thing over and over and over again, and it's not like, oh God, I got to make a carbon dioxide again. You're just thinking like, oh, okay, these are the elements that I have, and I'm going to get these points. And this is a stable molecule, so nobody can react with it and destroy it. That strategy is sort of built in there, and when you're doing it over and over and over again, you learn it, and like I said, it's like rote learning is very uncool. Like nobody wants to get in front of it.
It's poo-pooed in education. A lot of people just sort of poo-poo the idea of rote learning, but I still, maybe I'm just old school that way. I still believe in rote learning. I mean, I've heard of things discussed around the brain synapses and the way they're formed and things, and it takes so many repetitions to form a synapse. And I
Oh,
don't
wow.
pretend to understand brain synapses and biology and all that kind of stuff. Like I fully admit where my weaknesses lie, and science is one of them. But it there's things I've heard and that make sense to me, and they strike true with me, and that's one of them. And so to me, I think learning definitely has its place, but it just needs to also be couched in the realm of connecting it to things that help you to understand it. So it's not just memorizing a fact for fact's sake, but
Yeah.
connecting the facts to things that are meaningful.
Absolutely, and it's just like it's also difficult to do actual real rote learning. It's why it's nice to do it in a game because it's fun. But rote learning is incredibly boring. I'm very grateful that my doctors did a lot of rote learning, and there's some fields where it's just like you have to memorize a huge quantity of information, and you got to come up with systems so that you can do that. And I think that games are like a very good delivery mechanism for just expanding your knowledge. Like I said, just like repeating, when you repeat something all those times, it's just like, oh, okay, like I get it now. Like I get it because it's almost like second nature to you when you played it so many times. And it's like, and like you said, then when you get a lesson, it's just like, oh, okay, this is just like the game. It might just be a little bit different. Like something that's kind of funny that a lot of people ask me about with Valence. Sometimes people say like, oh, you should add like more elements. Um,
It was a
but
question I was going to ask you, is if that was something in the works. But
there are a few more elements that I could add, but like the thing about chemistry and particularly the periodic table. This is like I'm gonna like raising my finger up in the air, go into a little personal bug that goes up my rear end. I guess is that there's this obsession with like kids memorizing the periodic table. And you don't need to memorize all the elements of the periodic table. You need to memorize how the periodic table is organized. So then you can look at the periodic table and you can say like, oh, okay, iodine. Okay, so that's in the same column as oxygen and sulfur. So it probably, oh, sorry, no, not oxygen and sulfur. Iodine is the same column as fluorine and chlorine. It's like, okay, so it probably behaves a lot like those things. So you don't really need to know, and there's like a lot of elements that are just like, like what was it, cesarean or like there's just a lot of elements that like beryllium, like I don't know, like do you need to know everything about beryllium? Like I'm not sure that you necessarily do. Like there's some that are like, I'd say like, yeah, you should know about oxygen, you should know about carbon, you should know about hydrogen. These are like very important elements, and they play a very substantial part in all of our lives. But just sort of knowing how these things work and knowing how the systems work and knowing how different elements connect to each other, it just tells you how all of the different elements connect to each other. There's not that much difference between how sulfur connects to something and how oxygen connects to something. And that's something you can kind of see in Valence Plus. Like there's metal oxides and there's metal sulfides, and you basically are just swapping out the oxygen and the sulfur in that case.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just, like there's a lot of things that it's like you don't just want to teach people knowledge. It's like maybe I'm going back on what I said before about like rote learning, but you want to teach people these systems and how they actually work.
Well, of course, yeah, and I mean it's giving them again, like the teachers the launching point to teach the students, but also the students the launching point is to say, I have this base understanding. How can I apply that to increase my understanding and to grow out from there?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't think there's any games that would be able to sort of say I can teach this subject and I can teach everything in it, particularly when you get into something like science. I mean, I think there's some pretty amazing science games out there which do a great job for teaching different things, but not all things are going to be.
You have to limit your scope when you're doing a science
Yeah.
game. I mean, science is a pretty broad topic,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
I don't see how you could I think the best games I played, like Genius Games put out a pretty good one called Cytosis a few years ago. That's
Mhm.
like basically about I don't know, like transferring ATP within a cell, but it's got a very focused range on what it's actually teaching you. And I think that's great because then you learn how that system works like very, very
Mhm.
well. It doesn't just decide to teach everything about, cell biology. It doesn't, it's not, it doesn't get sort of weighed down by that kind of ambition. I've seen some people try to make games like that, and it's just like, you got to focus. You got to focus on something in particular, I think, when you're doing any kind of educational game.
Mhm. Well, I mean, because they did that, as you say, it has a very sort of broad overview of what happens within a cell for the cellular biology. But then they get to one that's even more specific, like with peptide,
Yeah.
where you're making the peptide chains inside so that's like, whoa, I guess, even more focused. So
Exactly.
yeah, I mean, but yeah, there's just a lot of great things. And I want to tell you one funny story here with the you talk about the rote learning and how you can start to learn one thing, but also it can go backwards too, where you see something in the game and it connects to something you already knew, but maybe you didn't know. You don't. It's making that connection, because I remember playing the game and I'm like, oh look, I put the card stick and oh, I see, I'm seeing the connection here. These three different elements that I have, and I can make this thing here. Oh, I have two. I have an oxygen and two hydrogens. That makes a water. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, duh, H2.
Right.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
uh, didn't initially make that connection, but yeah, the H2, of course, two hydrogen atoms, one oxygen,
Yeah.
and boom, I made my water. And it was just okay, yeah. Kind of felt silly for a second, but I'm like, that's
No, but
again,
that's what you're
again, it's
trying to
part of it.
do.
Again, the connection was there. In my back of my mind, I knew that's what it meant, but just reinforcing that connection
Yeah, and
through
also science
these
in
practices.
particular, chemistry definitely. There's just so much jargon, and just like getting comfortable with like all the different, vocabulary and everything that you're dealing with there can I think be extremely helpful, especially just with like people get really intimidated, especially by chemistry. It's something
Mhm.
that's very funny about when I introduce my game to people is that like kids are like, oh, what's this game? Like, oh, cool. Like they don't have any fear of it, but like adults are often like, oh, like I'm really bad with chemistry. Like I don't know if I can play this game. And I'm like, well, no, that's what the game's for. And you can't play this game. I mean, kids are just a little bit different too, because they're just learning new games all the time. So it's not like it's just a lot less intimidating for them.
Well, I think it's just also sad, but it's just a built up, um, it's the lifelong habit, the lifelong belief of the adult to say things like, I suck at math.
Yeah.
Science is hard. And they, it's said, and it's almost like they accept, like, it's okay. It's okay that I suck at math. No, it's not okay that you suck at math. And it's not okay that you just think science is hard and you're not even going to try this. I mean, but as you said, once they get past that, they can see that there is, because I think they're trying to learn when a lot of times when science is being taught, it's being taught in such a way that, like, here's a book, I'm going to talk at these things at you, and we're going to read it together, and you're just going to get it. And
Yeah.
I don't get it. I don't make these connections. I don't understand what's happening because I'm just reading it. Not everybody learns that way, but by
Yeah.
playing it in the game and actually connecting it to something, actions that you are taking, and you're producing these effects, and you're producing these, connecting these, combining these atoms to make these different compounds and molecules and things, and then just suddenly it all makes sense. And well, it makes more sense anyway,
Yeah.
and you can start to make a sense of it. And to me, like I say, I've said many times in my channel, like, I wish I was taught with games when I was younger, because I was never a great student, and it's only through the play of games that things like my math skills got developed to the point where they're at now, because I was always a poor student in that way. Good at
Yeah.
reading.
No,
I
games
read
are
very
a
good,
great
but
way.
math,
They're a great way to learn, and there's so much sort of I was hinting about like Catan and stuff, and it's just like, there's just so much knowledge that you just you consume when you're playing a game, and when you're really getting into the strategy of it, it's like there's a lot that you are learning. You're learning like so much when you're playing a game. So
hmm
I think it really is just like a fantastic delivery mechanism for just conceptual learning, or like just broad-based knowledge.
absolutely, absolutely, 100% agree. So, what other games are you currently working on then? When we were talking before, you mentioned that you're doing some other games and
Yeah, no, well, I've been trying to work on a few games, like like I tried making a couple other chemistry games after. So first I did Valence in 2016, very early 2016. Valence was released, and then I did Valence Plus a couple years after that. Um, and then I tried making a couple other chemistry games, and I don't know. It's pretty easy to make a game. It is very difficult to make a good game. But I am working on a new game right now. I've actually had this concept for a very long time, and I finally, I think last year was the year that it finally kind of came together. I think it still needs some work, and I'm doing like some very serious prototyping right here. Like I got like a hacksaw right here, and I got all my little
wow.
sped up breadboards and stuff. But I'm making a circuit game, and I'm really excited about this because I've just these circuit kits are incredibly popular. People really like them, but something I've noticed is that they're the type of like I don't even want to call them a game. They're toys or kits or something like this. puzzles maybe might be a better way to put it, but like, like a lot of them are marketed as games. But what they are is they're like, okay, here's some way to sort of connect your circuit to a battery. Here are a few different type of resistors, like here's some LEDs or some motors or something like that. And here you can build a series circuit and you can build a parallel circuit, and here's sort of a recipe for doing this. And I think with most people, they get one of these kits and they look pretty cool, and maybe a kid tinkers with it for a little while, but I think it goes up in the back of the closet for a long time after that. And a lot of them are marketed as games, and they are not games. They are, like I said,
Activities.
they're puzzles. They're puzzles. They're like, oh, like do this puzzle, or like, like some of them, like, yeah, like, either like make this circuit, or it's a little bit more of a challenge in that they'll be like, oh, okay, make this type of circuit and this goes here, but we're not going to tell you where the other parts go. And, like I said, that's fine. But I was thinking, like, like I was talking to you about games and how, like, I think you really learn a lot more when you're actually playing a game, and when you get done with the game and then you're like, all right, well, let's have a rematch, because like I'm not going to lose like that. Like that's the response that you have with the game. I mean, just generally the difference between puzzles and games. It's like, you think about how many times you put your favorite puzzle together. Maybe it's a dozen times, but probably not. And you think about how many times you played your favorite game, and it's well in the hundreds. So what I'm trying to do is make this game. I can show you the board right here. Like I said, I need to drill about, I think about 250 holes in this with
Wow.
a 1 millimeter drill bit. Like, this is like a serious, like, this is like real serious prototype. So I've made a prototype. It's about the size of a very large postage stamp, but it's too small. This is a game for 4 people. And the idea is, you have something, I don't know what kind of background you have with electrical engineering, but,
Zero.
Okay, so something that you are, when you are making an electronic device, say you're like a real hardcore tinkerer, what you get is this thing that's called a breadboard, and you attach it to a power source, and you connect different conductors and resistors to it, and you make something. Maybe you make, like I said, like I'm talking like in these kits and things like that, you build like a series circuit with some LEDs, or a little motor with a fan on it, or something like this. So I'm making a game, and you can see there's sort of like, there's some different colors on these boards, and you're going to roll a die, so it's random, and like that's a good aspect of a lot of games, like not everybody can make chess. You got to have some randomness in there.
I like randomness.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, you got to go to this spot on the board, and you need to connect a light to this part of the board. But every turn that you don't have that light connected or turned on, you have to put another LED down that you also have to connect. So it's a little bit like that, a bit like Pandemic. Are you familiar with the game Pandemic? It's a little bit like that, of just like, oh, okay, like there's this ratcheting tension every single turn, where it's like, okay, you have more work to do every single turn. You're putting down a connector, you're trying to wire the circuit, and it's a cooperative game too.
Okay.
So yeah, you're trying to solve this puzzle of how to get the whole thing wired. And it's like, and there's like a story behind it too. Like, I really like putting in like characters and stories. So it's like, there's this underground city called Breadboard, and it's contaminated with poison gas, and you need to get these what is it called? Living environment decontaminators, or LEDs. You need to get them turned on in all of the 4 color zones in order to save Breadboard. And it's pretty fun. Like, there are still probably a few like kinks I need to like work out, but like everybody has a different role, very similar to Pandemic, in that everybody has like some different powers that can get activated when you have, like, say, like an LED that gets activated in their color zone. Then maybe they can put more connectors down, or they can actually remove some of the LEDs from the board. But it's been fun. Like, and I've been trying to make like a circuit game like this for a couple years now, and I've made a lot of games, and something I find is like, you'll make a game. It's gotta have like you got to be able to finish the game, which is not easy. Sometimes you'll make a game and you're like, oh, this game cannot be completed. Like, that's happened to me a few times. And sometimes you make a game that like works, but it's just not fun at all. And that is really challenging. It's like, you're just like, oh, like, well, but this game, you know, could probably be more fun, could probably be a little more streamlined. But that's why I'm prototyping it right now. But
Mm.
it's like I enjoy myself playing this. And like I think we are talking about playing games by yourself, and like, you know, that's basically what I do when I prototype a game, is that I play um, you know, 4 roles all by myself, and it's hard to keep track of like which
Mm.
player I am all the time. I have different
I
systems
hear
for
you.
doing that. But it's pretty fun. I don't know exactly when it's going to be done, because like, you know, like Valence and Valence Plus, these are card games. These are very easy things to prototype. They're very easy things to manufacture. Like it's made out of paper. It's not that hard. You know, this is going to be something that I'm gonna have to really do a lot of work finding a supplier. I really got to make sure that everything is safe. You know, like it's going to
Mm.
be a lot of work. But I really do think that this is going to be a product that could kind of change that whole market, because like I said, there's these electronic kits, and like I swear to God, every single parent of like a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old like has one of these kits. And like I said, like I don't think they get that much use. They're interesting for a little bit. They're kind of fun to tinker with. I'm sure there are some kids that really go nuts and like really love these things. But I think that it's like, if you made one of these and you could bring other people uh, along and play this game, where you're going to learn like, oh, okay, like when you have series circuits, things are going to get a little bit things are going to get a little kooky really fast, you know, like that's a risky proposition, you know. But if I learn how to do like these parallel circuits, which is kind of like a best practice for wiring anything. So if you're making the home electronics, there's sort of a bias towards doing things um, the right way, and you're going to learn um, relationships between current and you know, current and voltage. Like, okay, like when you have more lights on the board, they're lighting up a little bit darker, you know. So there's some things that it's going to be not quite as you know, it doesn't. I think it's going to teach some sort of high level concepts, but it's not going to be in this sort of like mathematical way. It's really just kind of like putting this unique puzzle together each time, and trying to just keep, like I said, like all these sort of fires from going up. Like that's like I think I heard somebody talk about making a good cooperative game, and a good cooperative game is like you have to have an objective, and then you have to have fires that you have to put out, and
Mm.
you got to do both of those things at the same time. And the game does have that. You have these objectives, but then it's like, then you got. So do we go forward on the objective, or do we put out the fire? And that's kind of where the tension of these types of games comes from. So anyway, I'm having a lot of fun with it. It's tentatively called Breadboard, which is you know, like I said, what these kind of like when you take you know, like an electrical engineering class in college, like your first lab will be like, okay, well, this is how a breadboard works. This is how you're gonna, you know, this is how you're going to make circuits. So I think it can really teach the kind of stuff that they teach in those like circuit kits. But it's like I said, it's like the ambition I have is to make a kit that like people are gonna play this very often and really get a kick out of it.
Sounds great. That sounds really interesting. Like I appreciate, like you're just saying, the fact that it's this unlike anything else that's out there. I'm actually, I think Forbidden Sky has a very light sort of you know, electricity created connection component, but what you're talking about sounds sort of like a
What's
much.
this thing called? Forbidden Sky, you said?
Yes.
All right, I gotta write that down. I'm gonna take a look at it. Maybe I'll get some good ideas.
Yeah. Forbidden. So it's like the forbidden. You start off with Forbidden Island,
Oh
uh,
yeah.
and then Forbidden Desert, and then Forbidden Sky was the
Oh
last
yeah,
one.
I've heard of these, and I've heard they're great. I haven't played them yet. You know, it's a shame. Like it's like I said, like gosh, like
It's the same designer as Pandemic, and the his name escapes me now.
something.
Michael or
It's like
Lee. Um, I'm
is
blanking.
it Seacock or something like that?
But Pandemic, like Forbidden Island, feels very much like a Pandemic
Leacock,
Light.
Matt Leacock. Sorry.
Matt Leacock. So yeah, I knew the M. So Matt Leacock. So Matt Leacock designed both Pandemic and Forbidden Island. Forbidden Island feels very similar,
Hmm.
but you know, having played Pandemic, I prefer Pandemic. But Forbidden Desert is quite good, and I played Forbidden Skies only once, and it was very interesting, that whole creating the connection to do all the things you need to do to
Cool. Yeah, I'll
yeah,
check it
yeah.
out.
Yeah, but this sounds completely like much more involved and more educational, as you say. The focus being towards educating about the electrical engineering, the voltage and the amps and the stuff like that. So,
Yeah, just learning how to complete a circuit and what that entails.
mhm.
And what's cool about it too is that the game board will serve as like if you want to play the game, that's great. If you want to like tinker and make stuff, like you can do that too. You know, it's going to be a game board that you can use sort of build your own projects if you wanted to as well.
Yeah, so yours has multiple uses, whereas in Forbidden Skies, I will say it's really just a gimmick.
Hmm.
It's a gimmick that sort of like, oh, that's kind of cool. It does that, but you're not really learning anything from it. I mean, it's just
Okay, cool. Well, yeah, no, this is a project I'm gonna be working on for a long time. Like I would love to get it out maybe late next year, maybe like late 2023,
okay.
but like, I'll do a Kickstarter for it. But it's still got like a lot of work and I gotta do a lot of sort of like I said, like right now it's like it's a game. It's I think it's fun. I think it holds together well. It doesn't take too long to play, which is great too. Like
Well, when you do
about
the
a half hour
Kickstarter,
to
let me
play the
know.
game, but needs to get streamlined. That's the next process. It's just like getting
Mhm.
getting this thing together, and also like raising my kids in the pandemic and working on my graphic
Mhm.
novels and everything else. There's like
And
a lot of things
life,
going on.
life just gets in the way of all the fun stuff, like making
Yeah,
games,
right.
right? Yeah, but
Definitely.
when you do decide to Kickstarter, let me know, and I can certainly put some word out on
Absolutely,
my
yeah. I'm gonna
channel and
tell
spread the
tell
word.
everybody about it. Like
Mhm.
it's gonna be yeah. I think it'll be like I said. Like I think it has the potential to kind of like to sort of be a different paradigm for that type of activity, that like circuit activity. Because like I said, it's like in researching this, I've gotten a lot of those, and I keep looking for something that is that's just yeah. It's a game, and none of them are games. They're just puzzles. They're just kits. They're just follow this recipe and you'll make something cool, and you do. It's cool to see everything light up. It's cool to see the fan go off, but
There's no
like
problem solving.
I want to have a strategy too. A
Yeah,
strategy, like there's no strategy there, and having a game with a strategy is that's why we like playing games.
yeah. I think the problem solving is important in that. I mean that if you're just told do this, 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 and this, you can follow instructions, but you're not.
Mm,
Whereas you're describing the game to solve and see this is what I had, and understanding what you need to do to problem solve and rectify the situation to do what you need to
yeah.
do. Suddenly, it becomes more of a
Yeah,
learning.
there's a different scenario every time. You're
Hmm.
not just asked to do it the same way each time. You have a different set of obstacles.
Hmm. Sounds great.
Cool. Cool.
So, listeners who are interested in your games with the Valence Plus and the other things, so when the other games are coming out, like where can they find those?
I would say just go to my website. It's scienceninjas.com.
And I'll put that under they'll be in the underneath there.
Yeah, like there's the games there. If you want to get Valence or Valence Plus, you can get it there. Everything's on Amazon too if you want it. I also have like there's a lot of comics. Some of them are free. There's a lot of free comics on my site. You can also so I have graphic novels that actually go with Valence as well.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I have a physics graphic novel. It's called Big Trouble with Simple Machines, and I have there's a series of Valence graphic novels. That's like the big project I'm working on right now. And the first book has come out, so there's 3 books, and the idea is you get these 3 books and you get the game, and it's like a pretty comprehensive chemistry education once you get all those. The first book kind of lays down a foundation of like mass, volume, like very basic chemistry definitions, along with like important concepts like conservation of mass, like things are made out of atoms. And then you get into the later books, and they're really about the nuts and bolts of how these different elements are connecting, just like in the game. And the third book is kind of like how is chemistry applied in real life? Like when we talk about something that's a chemical, what does that even mean? Like it's coming from nature, but like there are all these lessons, but it's taught in the context of like there are these different science ninjas characters in this kind of dystopian future world, and they're competing in the world's most dangerous chemistry tournament, and they need to form like they all have a different element associated with with every character, and how they bond to each other or not bond to each other, or how those bonds get broken with each other, sort of drives the plot, but also drives the education in the chemistry books goes on. Like
Hmm.
there's an acid base reaction that happens, and there's in an acid base reaction, the alkaline like something like sodium or potassium would get isolated from the base, and that's sort of portrayed as like a betrayal in the storyline. So there's a lot of it's pretty unique. Like there are graphic novels that explain chemistry, and then there are graphic novels about like ninja tournaments, I'm sure. But this is like a graphic novel that I think very cleverly like fuses both of those things, so it can really give people like a good hook. And like I said, like I'm a big fan of like repetition. So it's like I'm trying to make the story that's like compelling enough that I don't know if you like read books with your kids, but like they read the same books over and over and over again. So you make a book that can teach people chemistry, and it's a book that kids want to read over and over again. They're going to learn that stuff over and over. So that's the idea.
And are there teacher guides or things that go with this too, or do you think it's clear enough in the book that the points that are made that need to be taught?
Oh, like I'd like to think that the things are clear enough in the book. If there's anything that teachers want, like also in the books, there's also experiments in the back that you can do at home that sort of illustrate the issues that you're dealing with. Like there are little quizzes on my website that can like test like how much you learn. But I'd like to think that it's like like the science is pretty like I don't think it's necessary to have some sort of separate teacher guide for what this is. It's really like something that like if anything I want them to be used as a textbook in some ways. Like that's I'd hope that they could be.
Okay, great.
And I work with other science teachers like to like I have like a panel of like 10 different science teachers that I like send all these things to, and they all operate at different grade levels too. So they can all give me feedback about like, oh, okay, like this is actually like a better way to teach something like this. Like this is something that students get hung up on. So I'm constantly consulting with like people with more expertise than me about like best practices for teaching this material.
Yeah, I always think that's important is to, I always say my best ideas are not my ideas alone, but a result of a collaboration with a group. I mean, I think that's great.
Yeah, science is all about community.
Yeah, well, so many things in life are so much about community, especially like board games and
Oh yeah, definitely.
education. Yeah, teachers were very much a community too. I have a great team that I work with at my school, and just the people who help out in the channel and all kinds of things. Again, community effort for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I just want to thank you once again, Nathan, for agreeing to meet with me today and have this interview. It's been fun. It's been
No, it's
great.
been great. Thanks, Greg.
And so just remember, listeners, we'll put it up on the bottom again, science, where to find the games on the scienceninjas.com. That's right.
Yeah, scienceninjas.com.
Okay, just make sure I got that right, but that will be on the title here at the bottom. And if you have any other questions for Nathan or anything, I'm sure you can contact him through there. If you have any ideas for me of other people you might like to see interviews about or any topics of discussion, please leave me a message in the comment section below. Always happy to hear from the viewers. Love to get feedback, and so I can be giving you relevant content. And that is going to wrap it up for today. Until next time, I am Craig Thompson-Wood, your host on Teaching with Board Games, saying thanks for coming to the classroom.
Are you coming back to school?